everybody, and welcome to the Good Bloke, Not Woke podcast. Today I'm sitting down for a conversation with James Greenshields. Now, I met James because he was referred to me by former St Kilda footballer Justin Kaczynski, and Justin said to me, "This bloke sorted me out." He said it was quite a funny story, actually, the way James went about it, but Justin was really struggling. He was going through a lot of indecision and self-doubt and really dragging himself down in some dark places. And he said, "This bloke got me through." And I said, "Well, I want to meet him." So the next time I was up in the Byron Shire, I went and caught up with James and had a cup of coffee. And he's an incredible bloke. He's been married for 20 years and I haven't met his wife yet, but I just saw a picture of her and I just thought, wow, she's got substance, this lady. And he's got two daughters, so he's got great women around him. He's a former military man. He went to Iraq and he saw live action in Iraq and was actually injured in a roadside bomb that his vehicles hit. He came through that, post-traumatic stress, but he went on a bit of a journey and he really sort of decided to discover and learn and evolve and grow. So after he went through all that, he sort of decided to, find the healing through all the casual issues of life. I'm just reading from his bio here, and he said the success of his healing journey is evident, and he describes himself as a man who lives with post-traumatic growth. That's a nice positive spin. So in the 14 years post-military, James has co-founded and been the lead facilitator for leadership at Emergent Leaders Foundation. There's not much this man hasn't touched, from experiences with First Nations people around the globe, running youth rites of passage for 10 years, overlaid on practical understanding of leadership in environments as complex and diverse as the battlefield, boardrooms, and professional sport. These have all enabled him to create a new paradigm of leadership that he calls Harmonic Leadership. With a firm belief that every issue on the planet can be solved at a community level within a global context, James has spent the last 2 years assisting communities around Australia become self-sufficient. A major part of his work has been shifting their consciousness and laying a leadership platform from which they can lead. So I've got to tell you, I rang James the other day just to have a quick chat about a couple of things, and we ended up talking for about 45 minutes. He's such an interesting guy, and so I was really excited when he agreed to come on the podcast. So let's get amongst it. So James Greenshields, welcome to the Good Bloke Not Woke podcast. How you doing?
I'm very well, John. Thank you for having me on. I love the name. It's pretty epic.
The name, yeah, it's good, isn't it? It's got some good responses, which is great. But it's just so cool. I was just saying in your introduction how I rang you the other day for a quick chat about something, and we ended up talking for about 40 to 45 minutes, and I just find it so interesting. I think we've got so much in common, but there's areas that you've covered that I haven't, and vice versa. And so I think we've started learning from each other already. So I'd love to get a bit of your background. You grew up in Victoria on a farm and you ended up in the military. How'd that happen?
Well, it was like I think by natural design is the way I say it. But it was a young man's journey of attempting to prove himself to his father. And Dad once said to me at the age of 10, if you want the farm, which was a sheep and cattle farm, about 2,000 acres south of the Puckapunyal military training area, you can have it, but you got to go away and you got to earn your own stripes, mate, because otherwise you'll just be Alan Greenshield's son. And back in 2010, when I was 1 year out of the military, deep in post-traumatic stress from Iraq, but was learning to help others on my journey, which I'd been drawn to, and a bit weirdly too, because people came to me and asked for help, and I'd say, "Listen, you're seeing what I'm in right now," and they said, "Yeah, we are, and you're navigating it really well. That's why we're here to talk." And that was a bit of a shock, but I'd sit, and then I went through a whole series of training and courses and rabbit holes, and in 2010 I was sitting in the kitchen and I started to cry because I realized I'd lived my father's journey. Like, he was a Vietnam veteran, a priest, Anglican priest, which is why I'm around. He had an affair with the organist. Luckily enough, that was my mother. And, she taught at the local Roman Catholic school for 36 years. Well, basically, she's still down in around Seymour. She's moved three times in my entire life. They live in that area, and they're realistically they're bedded into that area. But my path was one of the black sheep of the family, which I call now the black lion, who had to go away, earn his stripes, understand that he fought to be recognized as a courageous individual until he recognized himself as courageous, and in the process learn how to truly serve as opposed to be in service or servitude. So yeah, boarding school in Melbourne, loved it. Straight into the military after that. 17 years as an army officer in the thing called the Armored Corps or Cavalry. Deployed to East Timor and Iraq was the big one, where I took a combat team, over 100 soldiers, as a combat team commander. Saw a bit of stuff over there. Woke up over there to a lot of things, and then came home and had to die, almost literally by my own hand, but definitely figuratively, to find myself and rebuild myself, which my father's call was there. And, I famously tell the story about being 8 and feeding out a mob of Angus cattle on the back block, which I actually did a pilgrimage to about 2 months ago. And I took my family to the paddock, and Dad and I were just standing on the back of a 1974 Toyota Land Cruiser with 30 Angus cattle out the back munching on hay. And Dad's just gone quiet because we were looking, and we were in the presence of this bush block, which was about 200 acres. And I feared it because no elder had taken me in and welcomed me into country and connected me in. And I'd found out Aboriginal artifacts every time I'd gone in there. It was really powerful land. But Dad just was staring off, and he goes, with a big arm sweep, he goes, "There's my God." And luckily enough, I shut up because I didn't understand what he was saying. I didn't have the mental or spiritual maturity to understand. And he just looked at me in the eyes and he said, "But you got to go and find your own." The day I was going to kill myself, I was just about to get off the couch and do it. And that memory dropped into my mind. And I realized in that flash that Dad had asked me to do something that I hadn't done. And I couldn't, honor's been massive in my life, and I couldn't take the final action without fulfilling that call. And that started my journey home. I needed to hit that low to rebound and to shed the skin, to truly find myself, and to be strong and everything like this. I've never had a relapse of post-traumatic stress or suicidal ideation from there. I had big depression at the same time, and anyone who's been there knows that they are comorbid like tendencies. They appear at the same time. And then it really started my journey home to find what I truly wanted to be of service of. Like, I was wedded to the profession of arms, not the military. So yeah, it's a big call.
Interesting, isn't it? Like that, just one line that your dad said to you, there was something my uncle said to me once about my dad. So it's my dad's brother, and they were best mates. And it was when I was doing a really quite a deep process in the Avatar course, right at a crucial moment, that thing that my uncle said to me, it came back. I heard him say it again, and it was just like, it just was so pivotal and just integrating so much of my life that I'd been struggling with. So it's amazing those powerful statements. You just don't know when they're going to come back and revisit. Hey.
Can I ask what it was that he said?
Yeah, sure. So I'd been one of the things I'd struggled with was being attacked by people out of jealousy, especially professionally, and it was really sort of dragging me down. I remember one guy really went after me and cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars. He spent his days on the phone ringing my potential customers, and anyway, so I just thought, well, how am I creating all that? And my dad, he didn't have an ideal childhood. I think his mother probably had pretty bad postnatal depression, and he was pretty much ignored, and he didn't get a lot of affection from his mum. And anyway, I decided to take this on, and there's this incredibly powerful process in the Avatar course called persistent mass. And it's not something you can describe the technique because there's an enormous amount of build up to prepare you for it. But you actually find your way back to the moment where that situation created itself,
Hmm.
and what you've been resisting and in denial of your whole life. And anyway, that situation was when I was about 4 years old. I was on my mum's lap, having a nice cuddle as you do from your mum. And my dad walked in the back door. And you see, my dad never got that stuff from his mother. And somehow at the age of 4, I knew that that was something that my dad was sensitive about. And anyway, he blew his top and I got a huge belting and all that sort of stuff. And I just felt for my life a victim of my dad. But what I got when I landed back in that situation is the look that I gave him across my mum's shoulder as he walked in the door. It was a bit of a, but it just lit his fuse, right? But the thing was, what happened as I was in the middle of that, fully sort of waking up to the full story of what happened then, I heard my uncle say, "Your old man's a jealous bastard." Yeah. And like the whole thing, then the rest of that process, you get to actually discreate the whole thing. And it's like an aspect of your consciousness that's been creating forward moment by moment. It just almost sort of like it disintegrates back into awareness. It's just not there anymore. And those jealousy attacks just stopped right then and there,
That's incredible. And what an insight though, and a gift from your uncle. It reminds me when I was a young captain, I'd been giving my all. I was really, really devoted to the military, and my commander, who was in charge of our what we call tactics wing, I was posted to Puckapunyal. Actually, it was a home posting. Dad had only just passed. I was the alpha in the family. I had been in the family for some time because Dad was sick, and I didn't realize it. But I was out bush and I was doing as much as I could to make my boss look good. But my boss was never there. He was vacant. He had a lot of personal issues that were actually encroaching on his work. And I defended him to the hilt in front of everyone. And I was showing that my defense was actually in vain. And in the end, he turned around and he questioned my loyalty to him. And like I very rarely stood toe to toe with a commander. But if you want me to stand up, you used to call me on loyalty because that was my number one value back then. I didn't really understand it too, by the way, but it has a shadow obligation, and often I was in obligation as opposed to loyalty. But anyway, we're out bush, and he's done this, and there was this beautiful, really hardcore, solid lump of a man, Lieutenant Colonel from the US Army, who'd just come out of Iraq and been posted to Australia, to our training facility to help us and everything. And he was obviously one rank senior to my boss. And he goes, "Hey, Cheese," Cheese is my nickname. He goes, "Cheese, I need to be given a lift back to the base. Can you do it for me, please?" Like, and very rarely would you get asked that because I'm leading a whole heap of stuff. But in like when this guy Tim Renshaw spoke, like it was like, "Yes, sir." And so I just grabbed a Land Cruiser and I took him back. And he did it deliberately because he saw what was going on. He's a very, very observant guy, but very quietly spoken. But when he spoke, Jeepers Creepers, he had like a whole battalion of Abrams tanks behind his voice, that type of bloke. And he just goes, "How you going?" And I said, "Is it that fucking obvious, sir?" And he's gone, "Mate, I see a bloke who's really struggling to prove himself, who's actually doing a really good job. And if I was a person in charge of someone and I wanted them to do it my way, I would spend the time to explain what my way is. If the person doesn't do that and so just expects anything but what you give them, there's nothing really you can do. Just do your best." Now, he didn't point the finger per se. It was all done analogistically, but it was such a moment in time of what I needed in that moment, which was to be seen. And I had, joined the military, I had a need for external recognition. And that was one of my lifebloods, actually. But until that time where I could turn the mirror around and actually see my own competence and therefore become my own authority. But in that moment, he knew exactly what was going on. He knew exactly what was needed. And he just, those quiet words. And, those people in our life that can, particularly the older people that have seen life, they've got our credibility in our eyes and they just observe. They don't necessarily have to say much, but just one or two words, which are just so pinpoint on point. They're really massive gifts, I think, massive gifts to people. And I think, there's a beautiful Canadian called Stephen Jenkinson. He wrote a book called Come of Age, and it's all about elders in an elderless society. And when he speaks, he's a really powerful guy. He started as a is it pediatric doctor, death doctor, I think it's called. And he was doing that for quite some time, saw a lot of death and saw the medical institution over there, didn't agree with it, left that, and has done incredible things. There's a beautiful documentary called Grief Walker on death with him. But in his point is about elders and in this elderless society, and the call for elders to really step up is I feel dramatic. But the thing is, elder is not by virtue of age; it's by virtue of realistically wisdom. I've got two elders in my family, one's 16 and one's 19, when I choose to listen to them, and which I've trained myself to do very regularly. But I just really value people that don't push something or project something on you. They simply observe and then they just offer something right at the right time. I think that's just a beautiful human being right there.
And it's so, I feel like it's gone missing somewhere. I have a thing, that when I'm introduced to a man who's older than me, doesn't matter who he is, I call him sir until I'm invited to call him by his first name, because I just feel like there's got to be a reverence there for the fact that there's a life lived standing in front of me, and there's been experiences that I don't know about. And so the first step's got to be some level of respect. And I think that we don't teach that anymore. I don't know whether kids learn it as well as they could learn it perhaps in schools. They're not learning it in their local footy clubs. The too much willingness to back chat, and perhaps they get a little bit of bravado from their social media connections and those sorts of things. But then sort of respecting the fact that there are people there who have life experience, who have got a perspective that might be really helpful. But there seems to be a backing away of not feeling safe or respected enough to step up and actually share what they feel. What do you reckon?
No, I totally agree with you. And it flows on even to compliments. Like I walked past it, I went to a local spa bath yesterday with my wife who had a birthday, and this woman came out in a stunning dress, and I took one look at her and I said, "Ma'am, that dress is stunning." And my wife's right with me, and she's really comfortable with me doing it. Why? Because she knows where my energy goes. But like I'm not going to shy away from acknowledging beauty. I'll do it for men as well. Like I walked past this guy, this elder in the beach the other day who was just against a tree. And I said, "Hello, sir." And he's gone, acknowledged me. And he said something. I can't even remember what he said, but it was so beautiful, like the way he said it. And I took 3 paces and I stopped and I reversed back and I said, "Sir, can I just acknowledge your presence? Like you just have a really beautiful air about you, and I just want to thank you." And we conversed for just 1 or 2 minutes, nothing major, but he just expressed joy about life to me and everything, and joy about being in the phase of his life as well. And it was one of those magical moments. But it does take self-confidence to do, and I really feel that what's happened is we've got a veneer of confidence nowadays. We've got a very shallow, external based KPI, if you want to put it that way, of what confidence is, instead of what you're talking about, which is this deep, deeply forged like level of inner understanding of what my own capability is, and that's been tested, and not only been tested, but like there's an actual psychological term called compassionate empathy, and it means tough love. And the days have gone when we had men, particularly, that would stand next to us and allow us to plow in hard,
Yeah.
and stand next to us and go, "You done down there, champ? You want a hand up?" That they're not going to get down in the mud with us because there's no point. They'll get stuck themselves, but they'll put a hand in and they'll help us up, but they won't dust us off. That's our job.
Yeah.
And in that process, they'll then ask a question. "What was your lesson?" And it's like, "Here's my lesson." But they won't take crap. It's like if you give them a false lesson, they'll just go, "Really?" So they'll have this external accountability for us to actually, really understand it. I was down in Melbourne and I was watching my nephew play basketball. He was playing under 12s, I think. And my brother-in-law used to coach the team, but he decided he'd been doing footy and basketball for about 4 years now. He just needed a break this year. So they had another parent coach, but the opposition team didn't have a parent who was standing up. So this awesome young 16-year-old stood up, and he had obviously had a lot of knowledge about basketball, but he was yelling and screaming at these 11-year-olds. And so he'd time out, he'd get them in, and he'd be yelling at them. And I'm looking around this court and I'm flabbergasted. Like, no one has actually taken this 16-year-old aside and just asked him a question or two. And my mother obviously felt my energy, and she put a hand on my knee and said, "Don't you dare." And it was like, so anyway, the game's finished. This guy's been yelling all game. They lost incredibly. Everything's packed up. Mum needs to go to the toilet. That's awesome, because that young boy just walked straight past me with his father. And I just went outside and I said, "Oh, excuse me, mate. Have you got a moment?" He's gone, "Oh, yeah, yeah." And I've gone, "You obviously love basketball, mate. Would you be open to a bit of advice?" And his dad stopped and zipped around and just looked me in the eye and just smiled. And it was like a smile of thank you. And I hadn't said a word. I said, "Mate, you obviously know so much about basketball. Do you feel the young ones listen to you?" And he's gone, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I've got a really great rapport with them. It's like, it's not mates, but we're almost mates." And I just looked him in the eye. I said, "Really?" I said, "If you were their age and got yelled at all the time, what would happen?" He said, "The garage door would come down." I said, "Yeah, exactly. What do you reckon's happening to them?" And his eyes opened. I said, "Mate, you've got so much to give. Like, if you were to remember what it's like to be 11 and think that way, and then be able to communicate to them your knowledge, how would it go?" And he says, "They'd probably get along heaps better." Yeah, and they'd start enjoying. Because I asked him, I said, "What do you reckon an 11-year-old runs around a basketball court for? To have fun?" "Yeah." "Why don't you focus on that?" He says, "I will." I said, "Have an awesome time." And his dad looked at me and said, "Thank you." And it's like, it wasn't that his father wasn't trying, but that relationship often, that's why we used to have a clan that bred the kid. And he was like, the father was in desperate need of someone to stand up and actually help in a way in which was communicable to the son. So, but there was 150 blokes in that bloody auditorium, and I'm the visitor from interstate. Why does it take the visitor from interstate to actually do that? I was really fascinated. But the point is also, I'm in that moment. Just because no one else has stood up, does that mean I stand down? Or do I know something has to be done and therefore take the opportunity to do it? That's about me. That's not about the 150. So that's where I really sit nowadays. It's like, if I see a situation where there's a beautiful woman and I feel from the heart space to share, thank you, then I will. If it's a young person or an older person that requires a compliment, I will. If there's something that I feel is a suggestion, an offering, I won't project, but I'll offer. And that's their business whether or not they take it on. And I've had quite a few people that just go, "Oh, yeah, thanks, mate. No skin off my nose."
I think it's called showing up in the world, isn't it? I mean, yeah, I think you and I cut from the same cloth there a little bit. I always compliment people, always. And some of my best experiences have come from complimenting people. For example, I was in a lift one morning going up to the 14th floor of a building where I used to have an office, and I got in the lift and it was full of people who are sort of hunched over their coffees, looking like they've been sent off to walk the plank. And this big man got in the lift wearing this magnificent suit, and I was facing him, and I just looked at him and said, "Sir, that is a magnificent suit." And his face split like a tomato, and he goes, "Thank you." He goes, "I've got an amazing tailor," and he's showing me the suit and the waistcoat. It was a beautiful suit. I said, "Tell me about your tailor." And he's raving about his tailor. This is all taking like a minute. And I look around, and every person in the lift, their heads are up, they're smiling, they're bright. Just a friendly connection between two people has an amazing ripple effect. And it was, like what you're saying about that young boy and helping him out. Like when my son, I've just got one biological child, and Shane's now 35. But when he turned 10, I had a dinner, and I invited other men that I knew to come to the dinner and to sit around and have dinner with him, and all to get up and speak for a moment or two.
Mm.
And share some wisdom, and also did it when he was 13 and then again when he was 16. But out of all that, none of those men really played a role in his life. But what did happen through that, he spent a lot of time with his maternal grandfather
Oh, wow.
because his mum had a lot of struggles and I had full custody, but whenever he was with his mum, he'd have to be with his grandparents. And he spent a lot of time with his grandfather. And his grandfather was, head of production at Channel 7 in Melbourne. He was at Channel 7 for 45 years or something. And he's a very creative man, but he was very deliberate and very patient. And his motto was measure twice, cut once. And now my son is a very, very gifted and very, very successful photographer, architecture, construction, real estate. And I've watched him work and it's measure twice, cut once. you know, Not me, mate. I cut first and think, shit, I probably should have measured that.
I'm hearing you.
So yeah, it's beautiful having that, and I think such a relief to parents when we actually can make a contribution to their kids that they've been struggling to make.
Mm.
What a gift.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of single mums ask me because I've run rites of passage for over 10 years, and a lot of single mums turn up and go, "I'm in a really bad place. He needs male influence. What do I do without a dad?" And I've gone, "Well, what a gift." And they go, "What do you mean?" And I said, "A person who had a father right through to his death, like that was my father." And so I vectored all my fatherly expectations towards that one individual. Your son's got an opportunity to choose his father, like his father figures. He's got an opportunity to choose the man in which he listens to. And so don't try and be his dad because you're not. You're a woman and you can't be. And just allow him to and support him in endeavors in which put him in healthy male company. That's all you have to do. And look, also remember you are teaching him as a woman how to be treated, how you allow yourself to be treated as a woman. And so don't try and be a dad. Be the most amazing woman you can be, and that will be a gift. And that includes to him. Like if he gets out of line, that's disrespectful. So explain that doesn't happen. So and don't enable disrespectful behavior just because he's going through emotional turbulence that he doesn't have, say, a male figure or whatever the emotional turbulence is. Emotions need to flow, but they're the formless energy. They need a form, they need a structure to flow in. And so that structure does not include disrespect. That structure includes like a safe space. It includes space, non-judgment, but it includes emotional literacy. It does not include disrespect. Don't allow yourself to be disrespected.
So I did a talk to the senior boys at the school I went to last Tuesday, and I talked to them about that, about if you want to be really good in relationships, start out by having some respect for your mum and treat your mum like the most important woman in the world, have her
Yep.
back,
Yep.
and it was really interesting, the responses from some of them, but yeah, it's so incredible, mate. You've been doing some work with Aboriginal elders
Hmm.
and in that community. And it's so interesting. I just wanted to say, I used that word. I was talking to an Aboriginal woman in Perth who does a lot of work in the community. She's in recruitment for the construction industry and she's on a couple of boards. And while we were talking, she was so good. She's just, so in your face. And I was using words like Indigenous and First Nations. And she said, "Can I give you some advice?" I said, "Sure." And she goes, "Stop using the word Indigenous. We don't like it." And I said, "Really?" And she goes, "No." And she goes, "And First Nations." She goes, "Don't want that one either." I said, "Well, what'll I use?" And she said, "Well, preferably our tribal name, but if you don't know that, Aboriginal will do. But we'd appreciate it if you could learn our tribal name." I thought, wow, something in me relaxed.
Mm.
Because every time I grew up in, part of my life in rural Queensland where I was surrounded by Aboriginal people.
Mm.
I moved to Melbourne when I was a 10-year-old and they were just Aborigines,
Mm.
but somewhere along the line, somebody made that term wrong or bad.
Mm.
So it's very interesting.
Well, they'll use often when they go at the term, they'll say ab-original and many other different connotations. Our relationship is really quite fascinating. I I went to the World Indigenous Suicide Prevention Conference in Rotorua, New Zealand, or Aotearoa, as they would call it. And I went there. I don't generally, although people would say I've done a lot of work in suicide prevention, I haven't, because I don't believe in the current definition of suicide prevention. It's more intervention or postvention. That is that term that's used in the general parlance. Suicide prevention, in my humble opinion, is when one completely knows who they are, and then they won't have suicidal ideation. When they are deeply connected to not only who they are, but they can actually open their heart space to everyone around them. They won't feel like they need to leave by their own hand. So I went to this incredible experience over there, hosted by the Maori, and learnt and accidentally found myself on a table with the elder, the uncle and the auntie of the entire area, and they were so beautiful. Both were deaf, and I went to stand up because she put herself on my left and he came and sat on my right. And I stood up and said, "Sir, please, like, come and sit." And he says, "No, no, no, young man, you will sit there and you will interpret everything to each of us." And like, so he would say something and I had to turn to her, and it was really funny. But they both actually took me in and taught me so much about their local thing. And I actually sat there at one point and I wondered, was I a fish out of water? Like, I'm the white on the Ace of Spades, the backing of the Ace of Spades card, and a lot of the work I've done is with the Ace itself, like as black as black. And I found myself in a situation where there was an Australian guy speaking, and Australian Aboriginal speaking, and he was talking about taking Aboriginal young people away to country and helping them heal. And I put my hand up and I said, "Excuse me, can I ask a question? Is it true that the land holds the trauma in the song and the song is broken because of the trauma?" And he said, "Yes." And he's gone, so I said, "So if we take just Aboriginal people, given the land now holds not just Aboriginal people, but all race, colours and creeds, does that mean that the song can truly heal?" And he looked me in the eye and he said, "No." And I said, "Okay, thank you." He came up and asked me afterwards, "Do you want to go west?" Which is an invitation to go into his initiation. Now, I knew he wasn't the man, but I had a deep conversation with him afterwards. Unfortunately, because of shame and guilt that is often not ours to bear, we've inherited it. It miscomputes our observation of situations, and it doesn't allow us to objectively go, where are we, where do we need to go, and what's our first step? In all my leadership programs, those fundamental three questions I get people to remember in the back of their mind. They'll literally get you out of anything. Where am I? Where do I want to go? And what's my next step? And so if we're in a situation where reconciliation can't happen, why? The etymology of the word says it itself. To reconcile is to take one back to a previous agreement. There was no previous agreement. So we can't do that by virtue of the actual etymology and the energy of the word. Awesome. Just let it go, because that's telling us that we can't actually do it. We're trying, we can't do it. So where do we want to go? Well, that's a really good question, but that's a massive opportunity, painting a new narrative, a new picture for this nation, which is so powerful in so many ways. And our brethren who have walked this land for a long, long time are so powerful. Like they know the dreaming and the dream time, and they have so many special gifts, but at the same time they also hold so much wounding. And if I sit here and I bring in wounding myself, so therefore can't allow myself to see the wounding in another person and allow myself to be buffeted by that wounding, I don't stand true for the better of humanity. It doesn't matter if you're black, white, red, yellow, whatever. If you don't have the betterment of humanity in, then what's the point in talking for a global initiative or even a national initiative or even the betterment of a community? So, and the work I've been doing with elders, like the Aboriginal elder specifically told me that there was a big cleansing that happened about 90 years ago worldwide that was attempting to knock out elders. And he said there's now time has come for a rebirth of the elder, but most elders standing up are not actually elders because they don't have the link back through their lineage because of wounding. And a lot of the work we've been doing is actually in what's called the dreaming, is to actually heal the lines that go way back into the 1800s, where there were clashes. There were clashes between, let's call them white folk and black folk, but there was some very interesting dynamics. And if you go into it with a simple, well, the white man came and invaded mindset, you'll miss completely the whole thing. There's a universal law which says that I magnetize, draw to me, or attract people, situations, or events to prove my established beliefs. If that be true, what collective field, what distortion to the collective field of the custodians of this land happened to draw to them for the purposes of something greater, what's happened over the last 200 years? And what it actually was it was rigidity in the elders from the primordials, which is where the energy is held, and their rigidity to the younger generation caused a schism in their collective field, which caused an internal rebellion that was then exacerbated by the oncoming of something external. And in this case, it was the white settlers. And the missionary combination meant that they didn't have the emotional literacy to actually bring healing. So no healing happened in the moment required. It then manifested and became toxic to get to where we are now, where, yes, you've had children that have been removed, but you've had not only children, you've had communities that have been removed and placed in cities, and they've become disconnected from their land. If you take a person, you disconnect well, let's call them like First Nation, because I'm talking about that globally. If you take a First Nation person away from their tongue, their original tongue and their land, you sever their connection, because the tongue comes from the land, the phonetics of the energy of the land. And that's a deep inner connection. But the thing is, our Aborigines have only been severed in connection a few generations, which means they can reconnect quite easily. Right? My lineage was severed many, many hundreds of years ago. So my work to be able to stand amongst elders has been multi generational. My name is Greenshields. I am of the clan of those that protect the emerald flame, and my family have dishonored that because they let go of the name. They let go of the meaning of the name. And the emerald flame sits in one's chest. It's been, my father gave me the mantle, the gauntlet, when I was very young and I didn't understand what was going on. He gave me the gauntlet to say, own this, own yourself, heal yourself, and in the process, heal our family. He didn't say that per se, but his everything about him basically gave me that to recognize when I came of age to be able to do that job. And when I understand that, I mean, Binjil, I come from central Victoria, around Seymour area. So the Bunjil is the wedge-tailed eagle, is literally the totem of that area. Now, if I grab my hat, this is my slouch hat from when I was in my military days. I was in Armour Corps, so it's got emu plume. But you'll be able to notice the badge. Oops. The badges of a wedge-tailed eagle. And that sat on my forehead, on my third eye, for 17 years, well, not quite 17 years, but most of my military career. And the banner says courage. And that was our mascot. Courage was our mascot. What was I charging around the bloody battlefield everywhere, getting myself into sticks to try and prove? I was trying to prove I was courageous. Now, I didn't see that until 5 years after getting out and actually looking up into my closet and going, oh my God, James, you think you're intelligent every now and then, but that's been right in your face so long. I mean, it's a massive conversation, but the elders see through crap. They see through stories and narratives. That's why, it's called Maya in Sanskrit, the Great Illusion. In the Egyptian mythology, it's called the Veil of Isis. I mean, if you go to Christian mythology, in the death of Christ, you'll notice the veil was cut from top to bottom, which actually means that from earth to spirit were united. Like in all mythological traditions, it's this whole premise that our understanding of perception of reality is actually false. Then you go into the new fields of science, like holographic science, explaining it from a physics and a quantum physics realm. And that really gets exciting because you get the unity of science and spirituality coming together and harmonizing. But the point is, like, an elder will see through that veil, and they'll see through the story you tell yourself which is limiting because it doesn't recognize your complete potential. And an elder will hold you accountable to your potential in with love. But that love, go back to that point about tough love, that love might go like kicking the balls every now and then. That's why I had to get hit by a roadside bomb. I needed to be hit by a roadside bomb on the 23rd of April 2007, fourth best day of my life, hands down, categorical. Why? Because I was so far off bloody track. I was charging off to become the general, which was not meant to be me. And like I needed a big kick in the balls to actually go, oh, what's my life about? Live to my values. So that has to be a daily pursuit for me.
There's so much in all that. I mean, we could talk for hours on everything that you just said then, but I want to go back. Something caught my attention. You talked about the disconnect between the elders and the young people a couple hundred years ago, and what that did, and then all of a sudden this outside influence came in. And I remember Harry Palmer telling a story once about how there was bamboo I think in Indonesia, and somebody had taken an offcut from this bamboo and planted it in London, in Hyde Park, I think. And a great fire visited the bamboo and it all burned. And then once it recovered, way out of season, it started to flower again as it started to regenerate. And the offcut that had been planted in Hyde Park flowered at the same time. Yeah, way out of season, right? And I just wonder sometimes how connected we are in humanity in terms of consciousness and the agreements that we might have made before we even came into this life of, this is the part you're going to come and play in my life, and you're going to come and, kick me in the balls, as you say, or fall in love with me or whatever. But I wonder if around that time, because I'm trying to think to myself as in general, we are the creators of our own reality. And so then what was it that was happening for the Australian Aborigines that somehow in their consciousness, they invited this wave of white men to come into their space? And, a lot of people keep jumping up and down with me saying, what about the generational trauma that we inflicted on the Aboriginals? And it's true, we did. But the question I then ask them is, do you think that those white people that turned up here weren't carrying generational trauma? From all the shit that went down in the Middle Ages in England. And so it's somehow, this great soup of creation of humanity across the planet. I'm wondering what I suppose the learnings are there, or what the viewpoints are of the Aboriginal elders about how they, as a nation of people, might have invited this invasion in, but more so they invited in the English, who at the time were the world's great defenders against slavery, and they didn't invite in the Japanese or others. Very interesting.
It is. If you talk, I can't give you a definitive answer. Actually, I want to give you a definitive answer on that. The question's a beautiful one though, because it goes to any traumatized body of people. And interestingly enough, if you talk to the deep elders, they'll talk to you about the impact. Australia came out of the West, so the dreaming came out of the West, and it was touched by dark forces. Like, be careful of dark, because dark is not evil. It got touched by evil forces before Captain Cook, and that spread there. So there's a lot of work being done by beautiful people in the healing of that particular area, which then has ramifications across the songlines. I live just out of in Brunswick Head, so just out of Byron Bay at the moment, and I'm on the biggest songline in Australia, between Monkey Mire in the west and Byron Bay in the east. But there's songlines everywhere. One of the things though that I've really seen, I've worked extensively, had post-traumatic stress and depression myself, and I've worked for 15 years extensively with people from it in that situation. I work very differently though to a lot of people. I firmly believe currently our nation, particularly the West, is what's called trauma bonded, and I'll use that term differently. They hero worship trauma. Resilience has become the next hero. But look at the definition of resilience. It requires an adversary. But what is an adversary by nature? An adversary by nature is one who I perceive to be adversarial. Yeah. So therefore means I've generated the adversary. So therefore, resilience is a self-perpetuating beast. It's like a self-licking ice cream. I need resilience because of the way that I'm actually engaging the world. Go back to your beautiful point. You're a co-creator of your own reality. So if therefore, all the news is about resilient people and they get up and do the motivational speech and this, that, and the other, and we really feel good. The real problem there is that we're constantly perpetuating this fight and we're worshiping those that having this constant healing loop. Like across the original traditions would stipulate not about healing, but about a spiritual journey. So what happens if we let go of the need to heal and realize healing is a process, like a spiral process, which actually takes us on this journey of evolution? We don't grow, we evolve, because evolving requires death. Growth is just one-way trajectory and is consuming. That's why economic growth, all it does is consumes, doesn't have any death to it. So what happens if we went back to like basics? When I was a combat team commander getting people ready to go to Iraq, my number one premise, be brilliant at the basics. Do your chin strap up of your helmet. Why? This is the Kevlar outer shell of my helmet the day I was hit by the bomb. It weighs in at about, I don't know, 3-4 kilo. That was found 80 meters from my vehicle when that was the blast. Now, that thing was meant to have an inner, like a Murph inner, and sit on my head like so.
Yeah.
And I insisted everyone do their chin strap up, but blokes would be driving around with their chin straps dangling. Your helmet can't do anything for you. Reason why my face is still intact is because I had my chin strap done up and I was wearing my ballistic goggles. That thing got ripped off my face, but in the process took the shrapnel hit well, I got shrapnel here and into between there's a small gap in it. I got it in my head as well, but it saved my face and in all probability saved my life because of being brilliant at the basics. So if I extrapolate that back to what I'm saying with this spiritual evolutionary journey, it means that I have to become really adept at moving out of denial. Don't even notice I'm lying, which is my acronym for denial. And I realize, cool, I've got a wound here. So I own the wound and I go into the wound. I don't go for the medicine cabinet. I don't go and project that wound into the outside world. And I don't say, because I've got this wound, you all need to change. That's actually what happened in World War II, because we had such a massive population, 38%, I think, of working average males went to war and were affected in some way, shape, or form, came back. That level of consciousness to be traumatized shifts the general consciousness of a nation. So they accommodate that wound and trauma and they don't fix it. It incubates, we then get Vietnam, we get all the others, etc., etc. It's still sitting there and it's metastasized in different ways. So we've got, as you pointed out, we've got this generational trauma. It's sitting there, cool. So I don't deny that it's there, but I become adept at realizing how to heal in an evolutionary process, which requires mini deaths, little deaths, deaths of who I thought I was. I thought when I joined the military at 18 that I was going to become the general. Like great mates of mine, one is a chief of Air Force at the moment, a couple of others are generals now. That was my class, and bless them for what they've chosen to do in their life. And so the point is that I needed to choose, like I'm on the planet for a different path. I needed to have that phase of my life die. I needed the James Milton Greenshields 3805476 major die so that I could become the James Greenshields without the pistol on his hip and the medals on his chest and the rank on his shoulder for people to listen to me, and actually realize that the reason why a person wants to listen to me is because I have something to gift from wisdom lived, not accoutrements worn. And in that process, the healing goes and goes and goes and goes. Now, I started my healing journey because of my kids, not my wife. I was in too much shame and guilt when I got back from Iraq about cursing, and I didn't understand shame and guilt back then. By the way, the biggest killer of Australian men between 15 and 44 is not suicide. Suicide is the action taken by a person who has been hit by shame and guilt. Just look at the amount of cocaine being utilized like at the moment in society. Cocaine suppresses the emotion of shame. So it's a go-to drug for that, and you'll lose yourself in it, but you'll lose any need to suppress your inhibitions, and you'll do stuff that you wouldn't normally do. Gets you through the day, whatever. So the point here is that that's a running to some external substance instead of coming back and realizing there's an emotional wound in here that I need to become adept at actually going into. It's got medicine for me, which will create the evolution in me for me to become the person that I am. And in that process, everyone benefits. Like everyone benefits.
So cool. I mean, I couldn't help thinking as you're talking about that. It's like the whole foundation of the work that Harry Palmer created with the Avatar course is about moving through those things, those fixed ideas, those identities, and discovering who you really are, right at the core of your being, and then being able to really live in that space. But you can't stay there, because then that becomes another definition. You've got to keep moving forward, keep
Yep.
stretching, and it's like, I don't know, I'm probably 15, 20 years older than you, but it's so exciting. I'm learning from you. It's like there's new viewpoints opening up for me here that I feel are really exciting, and yeah, that stretch, and I think that, from what I've read in some of the indigenous cultures around the world, there's that constant stretch for continuing to grow and find yourself and discover new capacities and move through limitations and those sorts of things. But, in, like Anglo-Saxon Australia, it's just been whittled down to basically get a good career and buy a house,
Well, and you got the MCG behind you. I mean, that Mecca. And funnily enough, I can probably see my boarding school the other side of the park. But
Well, grammar boy, weren't you? Was that?
yeah, it was Melbourne Grammar Board. I actually had a
I'm,
membership at
I'm
that place.
surprised you're as tough as you are, mate.
I'll take that one. I'll take that one.
I've got a
Uh,
couple of very good friends, Melbourne Grammar boys. Yeah, and we played a lot of football against the old Melburnians in the Amos, and I actually do a lot of work with Ian Cordner, who's an OM's man, because we work on creating the Big V luncheon, the Legends luncheon for the amateurs, because I got to play state and all Australian footy and stuff, and but there was a fellow by the name of Rowan Brown who played for OMs, and he's the most casual, laconic bloke. He played a few games at Carlton, but I don't think Rowan liked training very much, And he got himself into a bit of trouble a few years ago because he's a vice principal at Trinity, and he cut a kid's hair on photograph day. And there was a big storm, and he got fired, and then the school community said, no, you got to bring him back. So he's a very lovable big man, and I was a pretty good footballer, but Brownie used to just towel me up every time I played against him. So I sort of have a weird sort of affection for the OMs. But anyway, back to what you were saying.
Well, it's actually really that's a beautiful story unto its own. Like a bloke who obviously is just being himself, and because of that, loved, and therefore does something in which he believes true to himself, whether or not he decided that it wasn't afterwards or whatever. It doesn't matter. When he holds to his guns, it's fine. But this community actually said, no, we see through that incident. We know who we are, and we want him. There's a whole risk industry. Interestingly enough, you look at the risk industry's growth and you actually look at incidents that's occurred. You might actually see a direct correlation in statistic. And we know this in mind, like the way the subconscious works is what you focus on is what you get. And that's an old adage from way back before psychology. But how beautiful is it that his community supported and got together and protecting him? That's old school. That's really cool. Really cool. What were
Oh,
we talking about?
yeah, so we were talking about how that path of continued growth, and you'd been previously talking about shame and guilt, and then your attention went to the MCG and perhaps Melbourne Grammar there somewhere.
Not surprised it went to the G, but it's actually all wrapped up. Like you mentioned Western society, we've lost our rituals, our rites. Rites, like if you look at the old cultures, there's ceremony held energy. And if you look at the Aboriginal rites of passage, they were literally psychology 101, just there, like tens of thousands of years old. The way their rites of passage were weaved, but the thing is, you didn't just go on a rite of passage. You were trained by your tribe for 12 years into varying things like altered states of consciousness, ways of being, hunting, everything. You would train by all the varying people based on who you were as well. They knew some people were meant to be shamans. Some, well, actually, they didn't call it. That's a Mongolian term and very much a romanticized term. But anyway, yeah, the men of high degree or the medicine people well. Now, interestingly enough, there's a direct correlation between the decline of the medicine person and the income of Western medicine into Aboriginal culture. Because what we've understood now about the placebo effect and its opposite, the nocebo effect, is that if a pill taken, the placebo effect being the ability of the mind to actually get a person better. Now, if they take a placebo, be that a saline or whatever pill that has a physiological effect, it just doesn't go down the gullet, but it creates a stimuli that actually increases the placebo effect. So if Western medicine came in, it's like Prozac, etc. They all have a physiological response. So in other words, it's not necessarily Prozac which is doing the gig, it's actually the placebo as well. It's very, very hard to narrow it down, but in a study. The point is, though, that medicine person's ability was based on their tribal collective belief. And as soon as Western medicine came in and it was having these weird effects and they've been told this is the way, the belief in the medicine person started to decline and their effectiveness started to decline. It's really, I see that as a really fascinating thing, but they have an understanding that they don't believe in adverse mental conditions the way we believe in. They see it as a spiritual awakening waiting to happen. And there's real power in that when you say waiting to happen, because that requires the person's impetus. It's like I'll say, if I take a person into a situation where they're like, I don't do any healing. I'll just present them to a door. And that door is for them to move through. And I can stand with them and energetically I can move through the door after them. But at the same time, there's some doors in which they just have to venture through on their own. Why? Because that's the purpose of what they're doing. And I can take them up to the door, but it's their job to actually walk through the door. One of the biggest misnomers in call it the health practitioner or the healing space or the medical industry or whatever you want to call it, in the people, the conglomerate or collective of people that are actually on the planet to serve the well-being of humanity, which I would put all those factors in, from doctors through to chiropractors through to healers, etc. I'd put them into that one box. If they get the God complex, which is they do the healing, it actually has a dramatic decrease in the individual's level of resilience. I use that term cautiously because what they now know with the mind-body connection or the psychosomatic connection is if a person goes to a practitioner saying that I'm going to get this person to help me heal compared to that person's going to fix my injury, the recovery rate's through the roof. And we know this already. It's got plenty of studies that demonstrate this. So where does that all come to? Come back to our point about healing. Healing's a person, you got to take personal ownership of it. And once one does that, you go back to your point about co-creation, like the universe literally presents stuff in front of you. The third best day of my life was when I couldn't even bath my daughter. I'd been back from Iraq 12 months. I was selected to go to Australian Army Command and Staff, Australian Command and Staff College, which was a promotion course for 12 months to Lieutenant Colonel. It was down in Canberra. It was an evening. Abby and she's in the bath. She's 2. We only just started to connect. And it took me that time. She was 10 months old when I deployed. For the first 10 months of her life, I was hardly around because I was doing all the pre-deployment training for my combat team. And when I went away, she actually had the abandonment wound, which actually manifested into her, which I've had to help her unwind and unravel. And that's just been an honor to witness such an incredible young being be able to have the courage to do what she's done and to be able to sit there and witness and just love her in that process. But I'm bathing Abs and she's having fun with me, which in those days didn't really happen that much because I was really low in post-traumatic stress. The workplace didn't know it. The military didn't know it. I was a high functioning trauma and depressant case and I kept everything away from them. I put on the mask really, really well. It just tired the crap out of me. So when I got home, I just exploded quite regularly. Interestingly, isn't it? Like the loved ones that I really love were copying the worst of me, and I was saving the best of me for the professional expression out there. The ones that don't want to connect to me as much as my family, really fascinating. Anyway, Kirsty yells out dinner time, and I said to Abs, can you just put the toys back in the basket? And she did what any 2-year-old having fun with dad would do. She took her time. I went from 0 to 1,000 degrees Celsius like that. And I had to put the basket down and I had to get the hell out of that room before I did something I'd really regret. I stormed past Kirsty and I said, you go and sort that fucking kid out. That's actually how I referred to my daughter. I stormed into my bedroom And we had a big full-length mirror at that stage. And I just stood there looking at myself and I just went to town. I said, who the hell are you, champ? You're not a husband. You're not a father. You're not even a man. And I realized on that moment that I was off path. I called myself broken. Now I understand no one's ever broken. We're just out of balance. But I didn't, like, I wasn't a fix it man. Like, people come to me with problems and I was amazing at fixing them. But this is a thing that was going on that I just couldn't fix. And I turned around and there's Kirsty silhouetted in the doorstep. And she goes, if you don't get help, I'm taking both girls and I'm leaving. And we sat on the bed and it was as close as I could to cry, but I couldn't cry back then. I said, I just don't know, babe. Like, I just don't know. She says, well, here's a bloke I reckon you should go and see. Now, she said, if you get help, I will stick by you. And I said, I will. I promise that I will keep making a step. I cannot promise that those steps will always go forward. And they didn't quite regularly. Sometimes it was 10 steps backwards, and that's the journey of getting out of there. But the thing is, like, I made a vow to her, and because I made it to her, I actually made it to myself. And that was the third best day of my life. It was me taking ownership of my life that I'd never chosen to take ownership before. My life was owned by the military pretty much, or by my wife and my kids. It was never owned by me. And that was a journey that required me to pretty much almost die to actually realize, to actually come to a place of ownership.
Wife, she's a courageous woman, mate. It's
That she is.
yeah. That's a big call to make, but she had guardianship over her kids too, which is extraordinary. Thank you for sharing that, because that stuff's deeply personal. And but I think also that's part of the thing that we started to touch on before, about how many men don't share stuff like that because they're caught up with shame and guilt.
Mm.
And I had a phone call a few weeks back with a woman from a football club, a suburban football club in Melbourne, and she was asking for help. And she said to me, our problem is that 80% of our senior playing group use cocaine on a regular basis. And I nearly fell out of my chair. I mean, I knew cocaine use was rife, but that's ridiculous. And she said the problem is the young kids who come up from the under 16s, etc., each year to move into the senior group, guess what they get introduced to, And I'm interested in that whole perspective. You talked about the other day, you said that alcohol is the drug that masks fear. Yeah. And you said marijuana masks sadness,
Yep.
nicotine masks anger, which
Mm.
that made a lot of sense, and cocaine masks shame and guilt. And I'm just, perhaps we could talk a little bit about that, and
Mm.
also perhaps with your work with elders, where they've had a position on that sort of stuff. But I find it really fascinating because, there was a study done a couple of years ago that showed that I think 74% of men who had attempted suicide but failed said their reason for wanting to commit suicide is because they felt like a useless, worthless piece of shit.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um, that's actually why I was going to do it. Like, my daughters had just run out past me, in fairy outfits with fairy wands, and went straight out the sliding door, and Kirsty followed them. There's my life. I'm out of the military. I'm sitting on the couch, and I just looked at myself and I said, "You just create pain, champ. You create pain for everyone around you. You got to go." And that's where I'd come to. It's like, I'm a failure. Who am I? I'm nothing now. Not even a rank. I got nothing to hang my hat on. And the people I love, I'm just too painful for them. So, in essence, what that is a scream, because I've so under all trauma lies the wound of powerlessness. And so, my journey was a deep one into understanding and regaining my own personal power. But the thing is, we're talking at a collective level, and collectively masking emotions, burying them has become the norm. We are an emotionally illiterate society, which means because we don't have the literacy, we have to develop other habits to actually navigate life in some semblance of what we call order. AFL just lost a number of other people to suicide again. We were brought into Queensland Rugby League with our youth leadership program because they'd just lost, I think, 5 suicides. I think it was 2015. They'd lost 5 young men who were all stellar performers, a couple of Islanders as well. Islanders with missionary Christianity have a deep connection to original sin, and original sin in that way psychologically has a deep impact because of shame and guilt. And so to help them is quite a deep and very sensitive, like it is with everyone, but a culturally sensitive path to do as well. Um, but it comes back to this point about elderhood too. Like the elders in that community you talk about, that club, have lost their way. They're no longer elders. They're senior people. They're not elders. And so to any organization, and I've had schools come to me, many schools come to me and say, what do we do? And it requires, like, you can't just answer that question with a simple formula. You've got to immerse yourself in their situation, because everyone is individual, but through the individuality of the situation you find out the general patterns. And the number one thing is a lack of emotional literacy. And when they're coming forward and they're saying, we're understanding it, we've got to get rid of shame. No, you don't get rid of shame. You don't get rid of any emotion. It's the number one. I love this thing, woke. It's the number one woke thing to do, is to get rid of all your emotions. You wouldn't have it if it didn't have utility. Shame is one of the most powerful guidance tools you have. If you don't go into your shame cavern or cave and actually wrestle with that dragon and then lasso it for it to transmute, it comes out of it, it will transmute from a dragon. And if you don't do that, you will always require external accountability, because shame is your inner accountability mechanism. And when you do that, it's a social emotion too, which is one of the reasons why cocaine is such a social emotion, a social drug. Uh, so shame requires, because you lose face, you get blood flushed, you turn away, you put your shoulder, all these physiological responses when we're feeling shame. So shame is telling James, stop, 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 champ. You are going down a path which is so offline. You need to stop and you need to get back. You are at the moment violating your inner code. And then guilt, its ugly twin sibling, turns up really quickly as well and says, yeah, yeah, yeah. You should feel guilty. You're guilty. You're guilty. And so guilt's all about authority, and it's telling you to regain authority by looking around and looking at the collateral damage which your actions have just done, and take personal responsibility. And in a culture where I'm going to suggest personal responsibility is not necessarily the biggest thing that we advocate, people might talk it, but there's a massive difference between talking it and advocating it, then and living it, I should say. So guilt's telling us to sort that crap out. And then once we do that in a culture which is like, especially for men, it's a direct culture. I had a lady in one of my leadership programs just before I was running a webinar, and I spoke direct to a man. And when I spoke direct to a man, I fucking talked direct to a man. I'll
Yeah.
look him in the eye, and if I need to get intense to actually explain that he's being a fucking little child right now, and that little child needs to exit stage left and get his man in this room, I will fucking tell him. And I will not accept in the boardroom the little boy. The boy belongs in the playground. Go out and play, and knock on the door when dad's been in the boardroom too long and actually needs to get out and play. I'm cool with that. But she got like, I could feel her. So anyway, in the next session, I worked with her on it, because she's only had abusive men in her world. So I was explaining the difference between deep assertive power, which is a masculine principle, and the wounding, malicious, out of balance, swinging around in collateral damage and destruction, which is what basically all she's seeing. And because of that, she could bring back boundaries into, because the masculine principle brings in boundaries, and she didn't have any personal boundaries, so we worked on personal boundaries for her as well. So with that, like the man culture being in there talking about a football team, it requires men to step up, to cleanse and purify themselves first, to own their own shit. And one of the most powerful things I saw when I was putting a whole Newcastle rugby side through our program was the president stand up. Now, this guy, front row prop, 110 kilo playing weight, a head the size of, I don't know, the Titanic. He's a box head. One of the most beautiful men I know in my life, such a deep friend. And he stood there and he said, guys, you want to know why I'm this big? And they're like 70 young men that worship him go, why? And he's gone, because at the age of 15, I walked into my mother's room and there she is, flat on the bed with my stepfather towering over the top of her with his fist cocked, ready to hit her. And what I do, I closed the door and walked away. 3 years later, at the age of 18, I'm 110 kilos. And he carried the shame and the guilt and the the cowardice that he felt in that moment for so long before he could own that. And it literally changed his physique. It changed the way he dealt with that. But to say that and own it in front of 70 young men who idolized him, like you could hear a penny drop. And one of the deep things that I tell men is I never ask you to be vulnerable. And I know Brene Brown's work and I know her thing on vulnerability, and I actually recommend it. But for me, it's like teenage emotional literacy. I'll never ask anyone to be vulnerable. And if I was to talk to her, I reckon she'd agree with what I'm saying. Because when a person like hears the word vulnerability in the back of the mind, it at a subconscious level, it gets defensive because it thinks vulnerability, I'm going to be attacked. So it'll actually get defensive. I'll ask men to be open. And you can feel the word itself presents itself forward, not back. So the next question is, well, how do I be? Once they're asking that question, that is epic because it can take them in, it can help them own their anger first. Anger is a gateway emotion to the rest of them. And it's a deep one, which is rattling people at the moment. You can set up systems within the culture of the organization that are, okay, at the moment you're getting angry, you need help with it. Yep, I need help with it, blokes. So take them away, deal with the anger, come back, learn the lesson that the emotion's trying to tell you. Right, you need help to put enact those lessons. No, I've got this. Okay, I'm with you. You just call for help, but I'll be there and I'll hold you accountable. Or yeah, I do need help. Awesome, I'm here for you. You set that culture of emotional literacy up, and you watch the collective like come together. Like it bonds incredibly. And I go back to my military training. We bonded really, really tight. We didn't realize why, because we were being fried physically, mentally, and emotionally. Absolutely physically fried and emotionally as well. And we bonded, but that lasted for a period of time. But if you take away the culture, often it doesn't last. When you do the deep emotional work, that bond will last eternity because you feel and you see a person's soul. And my humble opinion, the reason why I love the MCG, I think it's an icon of sport, and we've talked about this before. I think sport holds a key to help our society actually regain a lot of ceremony, which we can actually get each other back online.
The MCGs is a symbol, but this can go right back to community football clubs. And, I talk about, this is where we can support people to come together and actually celebrate the older people and find the elders who can stand up and pull young guys aside or young girls aside and say, hey, you sure that's the way you want to live your life? What are you aiming for? Who do you want to be? And it doesn't matter who you're being right now. What's important is who do you want to be? And I also want to toss in that I think I've mentioned this in the podcast before, but I was given the most beautiful definition of vulnerability by an avatar trainer. And it really helped me a lot because it helped me to actually enjoy vulnerability and find the power in it. And he said it is being in a position where you have absolutely no idea what to do next and being okay with that.
That's beautiful.
Isn't it? So cool, And I learned then that that's when your intuition always comes in and gives you a direction, Mate, this has been incredible. I feel like we could go on for hours, and maybe we need to do it again because I feel like we've just scratched the surface. But I'm going to put all your details in the show notes so that if people want to reach out and get in touch with you. And also, I'm excited to announce that since we've started we're growing the new initiative at the Global Wellness Institute, the Men's Wellbeing Initiative. James has agreed to become part of that initiative. So I'm just excited and can't wait to introduce James to some of the other incredible men that we're going to be working with. And stay tuned for later this year. I think we might be able to produce some really good stuff. So James, thank you. Wish you a brilliant day, mate. And really grateful that you took this time.
Thanks, John, for the conversation. It's been beautiful. And thanks for the honor of being involved in the initiative. I look forward to what it brings.
Thank you very much. And for all of you out there, don't forget, please, when you're out there in life, be the adult that you needed when you were a little kid and you're either in trouble or you were frightened. Take care out there.